after someone's had a heart attack to try to figure out and mitigate those risks. I consider that a loss, that we waited that long and have a problem before we kind of intervene on this thing that could potentially prevent those issues. Diabetes on the rise across the U.S. is directly associated with people that have untreated sleep apnea. The body is in a state where it can't get enough rest, and those hormone levels rise, and you start becoming resistant to insulin. Weight gain is strongly associated with that, and just poor activity level. So, I think we all appreciate a good night's sleep and can realize when we're missing out on it. Just want to point out, if anybody has a question, stop me. I can talk all day about this. Okay, so just raise your hand. Don't be shy. If you have a question, somebody else probably has that same question. So I'm going to talk a little bit about anatomy because this is important to understand to really come to grips as to what is sleep apnea and what is happening. We'll start with a little bit of normal anatomy. This picture is a little bit hard to see on here, but this is a cutout if you're looking at someone kind of straight on. Here's the front of their nose, mouth, and teeth, and then we're looking kind of right at the middle if we were able to show you all the stuff that's going on inside. It's a little complicated. We have our mouth here. This big thing here is our tongue. There's a cutout of that big muscle there. And really, we have two ways of breathing. We breathe traditionally through our nose, and the air kind of comes through this region here and comes down. And then we can also breathe through our mouth as a safety valve. Right here in the back of our throat is kind of a mixed area. We call it the aerodigestive tract, meaning it's a tract that works on both breathing and eating. And our body separates those two things so that we can send food down our esophagus and that the air can come down to a safe place into our windpipe. We've all experienced it when things go down the wrong track and we start coughing because this system is complicated and can have things that kind of falter over time. We're going to talk a little bit about how all of this triggers into sleep apnea and how we fix it so that we can get a better night's rest. What's snoring? Now, I remember very distinctly being about 12 years old on a road trip with my uncle, who we had the best of time just watching him sleep in the back of the truck, the SUV, snoring incredibly loud. He was so incredibly loud you couldn't focus on anything else, and he would stop breathing, and me and my little sisters would just laugh the whole time, and he would wake up and realize what's going on, and we were just laughing at his snoring. It's ubiquitous, okay? My 5-year-old, when I tell him to go to sleep, and I'm upstairs and I come back to check on him, and he hasn't been sleeping, and he hears me coming down the stairs, he starts pretend snoring because he's thinking that he's going to fool me by making that noise. It's something that we all realize, and it can be a part of sleep. And a lot of times it's connected to sleep apnea, but it's a little bit different. And I hope that we can get a little bit of understanding of what the differences are. And hopefully this video will work. Okay. Sorry that the image is a little bit bad. This is a camera inside someone's throat while they're sleeping. Okay. Further down, we'll explain a little bit more of this, but this is the back of their tongue that we're seeing back here. And then this thing that's kind of shining, unfortunately, the image here isn't great. This is a uvula. That's a little dangly thing that you see in the back of the throat when you look into someone's mouth. As you can see during that video, it's flopping all over the place. That's snoring. As air comes through that area and that flops all over the place, those vibrations is what we hear as snoring. And that's why all of us can make pretend snoring. We just relax it and start breathing, and we start moving that around, and we make that noise. That's not really dangerous. I'm not putting myself in danger while I'm doing that. But it's a hint that there is something else going on. And so snoring in itself is not a health issue. I consider it a quality of life, and mostly for your sleep partner. Whoever it is that you're sleeping next to, that's going to have to hear it. Because the number one thing, when I ask someone, do you snore? Oh, I got it. My wife says I do. Yeah. That's the most common answer. It's usually not my husband. It's usually, and my wife says I do, because this is something that happens more in men. Really, like I said, snoring in itself affects about 40% of adult men. It happens more in men, 24% of women, so less common. And there's a lot of things that happen. There are some people that only snore when they're sick. That happens a lot to little kids. When they get all boogery and stuff, everything gets clogged up in there, and then they start making that noise. And then when they clear it, they're fine. Happens on a dependent position. If you sleep on your back, one of the things that your sleep partner's gonna do when they start hearing you snoring is just elbow you a little bit and get you off your back so that you stop snoring so much. Alcohol use is a big one. People say that the night that I went out drinking, that's the night that I snore a lot. Alcohol relaxes all those muscles, so everything gets floppy and starts. So if it was just snoring, it's just a matter of that. There is some techniques about losing weight, moving off to your side, and kind of fixing that without it being dangerous. But this kind of bottom part here, see your doctor. It's important because it could be something that's signaling something else going on. So that's when we get into obstructive sleep apnea. Okay? Obstructive sleep apnea happens because the back of our throat is a muscular tube. Okay? If you look back at the picture and you can see it here, this area here is our trachea or our windpipe. It has rings of strong cartilage that keep it tented open at all times. That's designed because after that point, food and air should be separating. The only thing that should be going down there is air. So it can stay open to absorb as much air as possible. Okay? Up here in our throat, that has to still maneuver different things. Air can get down, but we take a bite of a burger, we need muscles there to push it down. And when we're awake, our brain is keeping those muscles going and keeps them firing. But as soon as we fall asleep, every muscle in our body relaxes. That's part of sleeping. It's relaxing and laying down and being able to relax. And so those muscles also relax. The problem comes when those muscles relax enough that they fall back and they block the air safely through it. Our body is in a state of complete relaxation. It wants to just breathe comfortably without any input, cut it on autopilot, and just kind of leave it there without anything. And when we sleep and those muscles relax, and the air that's moving through here on autopilot meets resistance, that's where we have a problem. If it's just a little bit, like I showed you before, it's just that flopping, and that's what we hear as a snore. Obstructive sleep apnea happens when there is a complete obstruction, a complete blockage of air. Our body does two things, major things, in order to overcome it. The first thing it does is it sends a signal up to our brain to tell it to wake up. Okay? When we are awake, we don't make the snoring noise. Our brain can start sending signals to our muscles, and those muscles tighten up again, and all of a sudden we have an open airway, so we can breathe. That's important to realize because I have a lot of people that get worried that they're not sleeping or they hear their spouse stop breathing and they're worried they're not going to breathe again. Okay? Not going to happen. Okay? If we stop breathing and our brain stops getting oxygen, it's going to wake up. And the second we wake up, we breathe okay. Okay? If you have problems breathing while you're awake, that's a different story. The majority of people are not just having difficulty breathing at home while they're awake without seeing a medical professional. Luckily, that's something that anybody can kind of realize on their own. Okay, so that's the number one thing that our body does to overcome. But our brain gets tired of doing that, of having to wake up when it's trying to get rest. And so our body, it might delay itself a little bit from waking up, and our body's trying to fight through that. And what we do is we build up pressure in our lungs to kind of push through that. Okay? As we build up pressure not only in our lungs, but the other thing that's connected to our lungs, which is our heart. And all of that builds up pressure until it has enough pressure to blow through that. Okay? And then we're breathing. We had a fresh breath of air, and we relax again, we block again, and then our lungs again build up pressure and kind of force through. The problem there is that our lungs and our heart should be relaxing. They shouldn't be building up pressure. They shouldn't be working harder. This is their time to regenerate. So you do that one night. You have a lot of blockage. No big deal. You do that for a week. No big deal. You do that for a month. No big deal. You do that for 10 years, then we're adding extra wear and tear to our heart and lungs. Okay? They're mechanical things just like everything else. So imagine the changes that would happen to your car if you were lugging around for an extra 50 pounds of concrete mix in the back. Okay? Yeah, your car can handle it, can drive through that, but you're going to add wear and tear to the tires, to the brakes, and to the system. And over time, that can be an issue. Snoring and sleep apnea are on a spectrum, okay? Where snoring is the very mildest form. If it's just snoring, then all you're doing is making noise. You're not blocking your heart. You're not waking up your brain. You're fine. It's annoying to your spouse. We'll talk about that. But it's not going to cause any issues. If you're having continued breakdown and wear of your heart and into your brain, then that becomes an issue that we need to address. And that's where I worry when we get cardiologists that are having people that have a heart attack. Oh, why did you have a heart attack? And we check, oh, you have really bad sleep apnea that has to be treated. This has been over years kind of built. I don't have a great way of deciding if someone comes to me and say they snore, if you just have snoring or if you have sleep apnea. We have to do tests in order to do that. And that's why that slide about snoring said see your doctor. Because it needs to be examined and make sure if it's just an annoyance or if it's something that could cause health issues further down the line. There's three main effects, like I said. The first one that I am very passionate about is quality of life. Okay? Having your brain wake up multiple times to breathe is not good for your brain's rest. Okay? Most of the time when you wake up from that, it's not a full wake up. It's not your regaining consciousness. Your brain elevates its level enough to fire those muscles and then try to go back to sleep. So you may feel like I closed my eyes at 9 p.m. and I woke up at 8 a.m. and I didn't wake up that whole night. I don't know. You say I have sleep apnea, but I didn't actually wake up. Yes, you didn't wake up, but your brain was elevated enough that it couldn't get the full rest. And so what I see there is that, okay, you slept the whole time. How did you feel? Most people will say, well, no matter how much. I could sleep 12 hours and I wake up tired, and I'm sleepy during the day. And if I try to read a book in the afternoon, I am just dozing the whole time. Okay? That's a quality of life. That's what happens to our brain when it can't get that full level of rest. We talked about the health effects and all those things that are associated with it, and kind of in prevention and kind of keeping your body in optimal condition so it's not having to overwork. And then the social effects there are on a couple of things. One, if you're tired, you're not going to be able to put forth your best effort at work. Okay? There's a lot of people that have issues at work because they're tired all the time. For kids, I worry about their school performance, and I see that kids that have issues like this are not doing well at school. Parents are worried that, maybe my kid just is not a good learner, maybe they're just, they're kind of not paying attention, and it could be something like this, where their brain isn't getting enough rest, and that's the solution. I've seen plenty of kids that once we resolve this in them, all of a sudden their grades go up, everything goes up. They were a great student, they just couldn't get that rest that they needed. The biggest thing that I see is, again, the spouse. Says, yeah, my wife made me come in because I snore and said I had to do something about it. A term called sleep divorce, which is a very common thing where you say, my spouse sleeps in a different room. She won't sleep in the same room as me because of how loud I snore. Okay? So it has very real effects and very real things that we see that I want to improve. Okay, so you come to your primary care doctor, you see me, you see someone, we work through this and we get a sleep study. A sleep study is designed to monitor you while you're sleeping and see how you're breathing through it. It will spit out a number called an AHI. Okay, it's basically kind of the summary of that study, and it's an average of how often you're blocking your breathing while you're sleeping. Up to 5 times is normal. That's just kind of positioning, you were in the wrong spot, whatever. More than that, we call that sleep apnea. Okay, and what that number means is an average of how many times in the last hour you are blocking your breathing. Okay, I saw people today that came in with a number of 87. Okay, 87 times in an hour. That's more than every minute they're blocking their breathing. Okay, if they're doing it that much, their brain is not getting rest. Okay, their heart and lungs are working hard, and those people are at high risk. There's other people that come in with a 30. That means every other minute they're blocking their breathing. It's still not great. It's better than 87, but it's still going to have issues over time for their quality and everything. The first line of treatment is what we call CPAP, what everybody has seen at some point. So this machine is a machine. This is what the CPAP machine looks like. It goes at bedside, and it has this long hose that comes and connects to your face in some way. CPAP stands for continuous positive airway pressure. The first line of management for sleep apnea. And what it does is it pushes positive pressure into your airway while you're sleeping. So I think of it as kind of, you think of a limp balloon. That's what your throat is doing while you're sleeping. It's all relaxed. This is designed to blow just enough air to keep that balloon up and into a proper position. It's not designed to blow up the balloon, just enough to keep it open, so that when you're sleeping, your lungs can still do the normal work that they do in breathing in and out through an open area that whole time. That way they don't have to fight against that pressure, that they don't have to, your brain doesn't have to wake up to fire those muscles, that it keeps it open. It works really well because it treats the complete airway. It doesn't care, the machine doesn't know magically where along that anatomy that I showed you there's a blockage. It just pushes air and keeps everything propped open. Okay, so it works really well. The other benefit of it is that the machines now are smart enough that they can keep track of all that you're doing while you're sleeping. So if they feel more resistance, they can bump up the pressure a little bit. If they feel less resistance, they can bump it down. And they'll give me a readout that when we start someone on this and you come back and see me, I can get a printout from the machine, how often you were doing it if you were cheating, how much pressure it was using, and how many blockages were you having while you were asleep. So I can see and I can show someone, when we did the sleep study, you had 87 blocks an hour. Now we're on the machine, you're down to 2. The machine is working. You still have some random ones, but 87 to 2 is a big deal. Okay. I made it sound like this is a magical machine that works for everybody, but the truth is that it's hard to do. Okay. She looks real comfortable here, but I would say the majority of people aren't looking like that. Okay. We're not designed to wear a scuba mask while we're sleeping. Okay. We all, every person that I know hates having something in their face when they're doing it. I've worn these machines and I've tried them all along the way. It's not comfortable. It's not intuitive. The machine is pushing up some air. So that means that you have to, sorry. Oh, let me get up. You have to relearn how to breathe a little bit while you're doing it to get into sync and to work with instead of work against it. That can be overwhelming. One of the things that I see a lot is people that have anxiety, they have claustrophobia because they feel something in their face. That's a very real concern, a real big issue that people have that makes this machine not work for them. Okay? It is the first sign. There's no people really that I don't start off with it because, like I said, some people everybody, 100% of the people, you're going to get it and you're not going to feel like this is the greatest thing in the world. But for someone that's blocking their breathing 87 times an hour, if I get them down to 2 with the machine, even if they hated it, they will tell me, I felt a lot better in the morning. I finally got a good night's rest. And that may be for most people life-changing. And it's like, yeah, it's a hassle to put it on, but I got used to it after a couple of weeks. And now I really like it. I have plenty of people that come to me and say, I can't sleep without my CPAP. Okay? I will not. There's other surgeries that I do on noses where I tell them, okay, if we do this surgery on your nose, you can't wear the CPAP for 2 weeks. I'm like, nope, never mind, cancel that. Okay, I'm not going 2 weeks without my CPAP because they notice that big of a difference. That's not everybody, but a lot of people. And I have to find a balance between your quality of life, how much you improve that, and how much we improve your health. Because I have other people that I hate this thing, I can't do it. I use it and I don't feel increased rest. Well, I haven't improved your quality of life. And the machine might tell me that I brought down your numbers and I'm helping your heart. But if it's not improving your quality, you're not going to wear this. You're not going to keep going through this hassle. So my job is to find that balance of what improves you and what gets you the best longevity. And really what I focus on is comprehensive health with a care for this, really. Because that's the key to my passion for making sure that I treat people with this and making sure I get them all the way there. Because I will tell you that unfortunately, CPAP is one of the very misused treatments. Because somebody who is not as familiar with the full care, not because they don't know, not because they're trying to do something just to get out of it, just because it's complicated. It's a complicated issue. And their best intentions is, I know the steps of care here. So we got a sleep study. You have sleep apnea. Here's the CPAP. Well, that didn't work. Well, that's the treatment. That's what works perfectly. So I don't know what to tell you. But the reality is that there's a bunch of things that go into that. Okay. Other treatment considerations that we have to worry about. One is lifestyle. Okay. I try to talk to people about their lifestyle. We went back to that big one before where we talked about alcohol. One of those big things. I'm not here to tell everybody, all right, you can't drink alcohol anymore. But you can change your patterns a little bit maybe if this is a big issue. Okay? If you're the person that, takes a bunch of alcohol before you go to sleep, you're going to have some bad sleep apnea. Okay? It's just no matter, even if you're healthy, that's going to be an issue. So let's change that a little bit. Let's change your lifestyle in order to improve that. So there's a bunch of things there that can push someone into health and not having an issue if we just alter a little bit of what we're doing. Weight management is a big thing. Okay? Men especially tend to carry their weight right here. And unfortunately, when they fall asleep, all that weight just pushes everything down. Okay? And it's a big reason why people have sleep apnea. We've found that people that lose as much as 10% of their body weight, which is a big deal, okay? That weight loss is hard. It's something that is not an easy feat. It's not something that I go out tomorrow and say I change. But a 10% loss in weight can reduce your sleep apnea levels up to 50% in someone, okay? So we're making big strides there. And that's something that needs to be considered, needs to be part of that comprehensive health. Because in some people, they can lose that weight and completely have no need for CPAP. So now I've given them a different solution that works for them a lot better, that works for them long term. And I not only get the benefit of helping them with their sleep apnea, but guess what? Your cardiac health improves, your metabolic health, your energy levels, all of that improve as we do that. So it's something that I harp on a lot, and it's not easy, again, very difficult, but it's something that takes big dividends throughout. Okay. Position therapy is one that I think it's underutilized a little bit. When we have all of this relaxed and falling back, that's going to be the worst position for obstruction. Okay? Everything's going to fall back on our throat. And so for some people that have some milder ones, I talk to them about positional because that's something that we can see in the sleep studies. Hey, if you slept on your side, your obstructions went down from 30 all the way to 5. So you were almost normal if you just sleep on your side. We can get pretty creative with this. Okay, I've had people that strap tennis balls on their back so that when they're sleeping, it's like, yeah, I always end up on my back. Yeah, well now you with this little tennis ball, you're like, well, that's never mind, going back. Okay, you can get creative, and there's things that can do that can help with some of those milder ones and kind of avoid the CPAP machine and kind of get a solution that's not as intrusive. I mean, although it's a little intrusive to wrap tennis balls on your back, but it's not as much as having something on your face. These are the ones that I specialize in that get overlooked quite a bit. First, nasal airway obstruction. Okay, if you can't use your nose to breathe, you're going to have that's the first level of blockage. Okay, sleep apnea doesn't happen 100% because your nose is blocked, but it's contributing to it because your body's having to suck more pressure in to try to breathe through a nose that it has difficulty with, or it tries to breathe through your mouth, which makes the a little bit harder to get through your throat because the position isn't right. And if you have sleep apnea and you need to try to use a CPAP machine, like I said, that CPAP machine doesn't know where the areas are blocked. It just pushes through. And if your septum is deviated and it's blocking one side, all that machine knows is I have resistance right here, so I'm going to push hard. And 100% of those people will wake up and say, this machine is blowing me awake. The pressure's just ramming up, and all of a sudden I wake up. And because we might have that. And so if nobody looks there, they don't know, like, I don't know why it's not working. Well, that's something that can be changed. We have here a little picture of nasal obstruction. Here, this is what a normal septum should look like, a straight wall going back and forth so that air can come straight and a good flow back. You have a deviated septum that's blocking one side. It causes a couple of things, actually. So the air can't get through here, so more air comes through here, and this side of your nose gets irritated. You have these things which are called turbinates, which are designed to humidify the air. Well, if all the air is going through one side, the other side is going to get bigger because it's trying to humidify more air. It creates a chain reaction where that tissue gets bigger to accommodate that, but then that starts blocking more. So it's a complex issue there that happens. The other big one that most people don't know about is something called lateral wall collapse, nasal valve collapse. Those are the cartilages that sit on top of your nose here. They're designed to tent open your nose while you take a deep breath in. Well, if the air isn't going well through one side and it's going more through it, it causes negative pressure that pulls those valves in. Over time of doing that, those cartilages can be weakened. And so when I look in someone's nose, they have collapse here. And the harder they try to breathe, the more their nose sucks in. Okay? Think about that if you just try to suck in your nostrils. Okay? If you have really good cartilage there, it should only move a little bit, but you should know the difference. If your cartilage is weak there, it's just going to suck down and you can't breathe through that. Now think about a machine that's trying to force air through that. As that air forces its way through that, it's just going to collapse instead of make the situation worse. And this is another big one that, like I said, gets overlooked and something that I find that this is my first step in helping people. If I see that, you have issues with your sleep, but you're also telling me, hey, I can't breathe through my nose. This is something that people kind of push off to the side, okay? And it's like, yeah, I told someone about that I couldn't breathe through their nose, and they said, oh, well. You'll get that answer if you don't know that there's a solution to improve it, okay? And people have a tendency of kind of pushing aside things as like, oh, I can get by, all right? Well, I can do two things here. I can improve your ability to breathe through your nose so you feel like you can get a full air. You don't feel clogged all the time. And I can make your sleep apnea better, okay? Either by helping the resistance down so the level of obstruction is worse, or what I find quite often is that I hate the CPAP, it sucks, it pushes air in my nose, like my face, it wakes me up. I fix this, after they recover, all of a sudden air can flow through that. Normally, they put on the CPAP machine now, the CPAP machine is flowing gentle air. It's not fighting that. It's just kind of focusing on here, and they say, hey, it works. I don't need anything else. The CPAP machine works. I can sleep with it now. It's fine. We can kind of hit two things with something different and kind of resolve it from that. Okay. The other thing are allergies become very overlooked as well. Okay. Allergies cause more inflammation of the inside of our nose as it reacts to the allergens in the environment. Okay, if you're allergic to corn and the harvest is coming up and all stuff's getting up, everything's going to get worse. You're going to get more mucus. That's going to make you snore more. That's going to cause more obstruction. Again, this isn't a thing that necessarily is going to get rid of your sleep apnea, but it's going to make it worse. And again, the machine has to work harder against you. You're going to get less rest, and you're going to get less sleep. And so these things are something also not to get overlooked, because fixing this may make you feel better, because now you're not running around with a stuffy nose or runny nose all the time. So it improves your quality of life that way, and it improves your quality of life with better sleep. The last thing I touch on is sinusitis. Can also be a big issue. If you have a history of recurrent infections, you're going to get inflammation, you're going to get blockage there. It's going to make everything worse. Also, what I found is some people with CPAP, machines, if they already have a tendency of getting their sinuses irritated, blowing air through that machine may push it over the edge more frequently. So now they're saying, it's like, yeah, no, I really don't like that CPAP machine. So I used to get like one infection a year, and now I'm getting them every other month. Well, maybe it's we were already set up before for sinusitis beforehand, and this is just the tipping point. And once we get that resolved, then we kind of resolve all of your sinus issues and double down on helping this. So what I'm saying here is that there is a lot of things that kind of go into it. It's not just one disease and one treatment. It really needs to be evaluated on all of these to kind of figure out what's going to give you the most bang for your buck, what's going to help you in your life overall, and what's going to get you all the way to better health from the obstructions. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is Inspire, which is what most people have heard about. It's very, very well advertised. It's all over the news, and it's something that number one thing that I get asked about this. Okay. So Inspire is among the list of all the surgical options for treating sleep apnea. Okay. It is the same technology as a pacemaker. It's a small device that is implanted into your body. It's implanted in the chest. Okay, about 3 fingers width down from your clavicle. So if you feel over your right chest, normally do it on the right chest, mostly because of convention, because the left chest is normally, if someone, an EMT were to find you and feel something, they would feel a pacemaker here. We put it on here just to distract for that, although I do place it on the left if somebody has, an issue with placing it on the right. But it goes underneath the skin about 3 centimeters down. You'll feel it if you feel for it, but it's not a big machine. It's very thin. You really, if somebody saw you without a shirt on and looked there, they really wouldn't be able to tell much once they feel it. But what this device does is it has 2 leads, 2 wires. One goes down into the area right in front of the lungs. It's a breathing sensor. So it can detect when you're breathing while you're sleeping, okay, and can coordinate those movements. Okay. For the other lead here, which is a stimulation cuff here, that goes to the main nerve that controls your tongue. And what that does is this device coordinates that when it feels that you are trying to breathe out and there's blockage here, it sends a signal to the tongue and triggers it to push it up. Okay? So what that does is the tongue is usually the biggest muscle here that you have that is relaxing and blocking things down. So by stimulating it, when air is trying to come out, it signals that tongue. The tongue moves up and out of the way. Now you can breathe comfortably through that area. Okay? You don't feel that. This is connected on a nerve that does movement, doesn't do sensation. So yeah, if your tongue moves a lot, you'll feel it inside of your mouth. But we trigger that stimulation enough so that it doesn't bother you while you're sleeping and just kind of works only while you're sleeping. This device is something that you control. It has a remote control that you say, I'm going to sleep. You click on it, and it knows to start revving up as you're sleeping. And when you wake up, you come on and you turn it off, and then it spins off, so you don't have to feel it. It's not constantly moving your tongue every time you're breathing during the day. That wouldn't work either, okay? But it's designed to allow all that function that I talked about, the brain having to fire those muscles. This machine is taking over that and creating a clear pathway for breathing, okay? The technology is relatively new, okay? About 10 years ago is when something called the Adhere and the STAR trials were first introduced in order to start implanting these devices in people and see how they do. Okay. During that time, there was the study also not included, not just whether it works or not, but also on who benefits from it. Okay. The difference between CPAP and anything else that I talk about is that all of these are targeted to specific issues. I mentioned that this works in your tongue. It's a primary issue that's blocking. That's not the only thing that's going on here. You have a palate and you have other parts of your throat that could also be the blockage. So if it's your palate that's blocking off your breathing, Well, moving your tongue may not be the thing that helps. So everything that we talk about here is kind of figuring that out. And that's what those trials did initially, is to figure out who it works with and who it doesn't. Another big issue is weight, like I talked about before. Okay? If you have a lot of weight in your neck and in your body, what they found is that this helps and pushes some of that out, but not all the way. And so that falls into it. If somebody carries a lot of their weight here in their neck and all that pushes, this is only so strong to push everything up out of the way. And so what I find is that what we found is that people benefited from it, but not all the way. And so if you have an obstruction of 30 times in an hour, and with this machine, I get you to 5, then success. Okay, we've gotten you to a normal level, a level that wouldn't cause an issue. Some people, if they had too much weight, it would come down from 30 to 20. Well, you still have sleep apnea. You're still going to be, your brain's still going to be waking up. You're still going to have all those issues. And then we would recommend CPAP. Well, if I had you on CPAP before, and we try to do this to get you off of CPAP, and we're getting you back on CPAP, I consider that a failure. Okay, I'm not going to recommend to you this device if it's not going to get you all the way there. It's not worth it. Some of the issues that you need to consider when anybody who's considering Inspire needs to consider is that this is a technology. Okay? All technologies have inherent risk. Okay? One, this is battery powered. It has a tiny battery that powers it. The battery lasts for about 11 years. So just know that you're signing yourself up to having a second procedure 11 years from now to replace that battery. It's not very much a big deal. Like I said, these started getting implanted on research about 10 years ago, and we're starting to see the first people that need it. And so it's not very common, but the ones that have been doing it is pretty simple outpatient procedure, 30 minutes of just basically all we do is just separate these wires and put in a new battery and take them back out. So it's not that big a deal, but it is something just to consider. Okay. The other consideration for that is, as technologies, everybody runs the risk that something better will come out in the future. Okay, the new iPhone will come out, the new Inspire will come out. And I can't promise you what new features are, but I will say that if we planted on something, it's not. I can't just replace the newest model right away unless there's something significant. So just something to keep in mind. Okay. The other things with implants is that it's a foreign body. These are metals and things that you're having in your body that are not part of you. They're made with inert metals that most people don't react to. And nothing in medicine is 100%. Okay? So there will be people that react to them that eventually.
I'm allergic to copper, so more than likely that would not work for me.
It doesn't have copper. It's usually titanium.
Okay.
Which most people are inert to, and some special plastics that are involved in it. So if you've had different implants that you've reacted to, it's something to tell, just to make sure that we run through that list and that there's nothing there that you would react to. Copper usually isn't in these, but exactly something to keep in mind, and something to know about, because there are people that say, "Oh, I've never reacted to something." Doesn't happen very often. I've seen one case where somebody had a reaction afterwards, and we had to remove the device afterwards. Something to keep in mind. Okay. The other thing is with technology is that it can fail. Okay, so this is designed to last 11 years and to work in a certain way. Every machine, anybody who's had a computer that's broken, it just happens. Okay. And just one of the added risks of doing an implant-based procedure. Now, I'll tell you, with all those scary things, I've seen hundreds of people that have been super happy with this. So if it worked for them, if we went through a pathway where we figured out that this would work for them, once they get it, it's a big freedom. Okay. Who do I mean? I mean people that, for instance, someone that enjoys camping and hunting, who can't do those things because they don't want to bring their CPAP machine along, or they're sacrificing their sleep during that time because of this. Well, now you don't have to carry or have an outlet in order to hook up your CPAP machine. You don't have to bring something with you. You just bring a remote, and no matter where you are, you start it. Very happy with that. People are claustrophobic that don't like that CPAP machine on their face and can't. There's no way to get through it. We've done this, and all of a sudden their sleep apnea is gone, and they can breathe right, and they have no problems with just starting something small there. Okay. But I just want to reiterate, this is a pathway that we walk to together if this is something that we're going to consider. You don't walk in and say, I want an Inspire, and I say, okay, I'll see you next Thursday at Waverly Hospital, and we'll put it in. Okay?
You said earlier that this works if the reason for the obstruction is up,
Very good.
but not your soft palate. So how do you determine what the correct?
Could you repeat the question? I
Okay.
didn't.
The question was, I said that this is something if it's your tongue is the primary site of obstruction, if not if your soft palate. So how do I determine what if that is what's causing it? And that's a great question leading into kind of the future here of what I'm doing. This, I just want to point out, oral appliances you may hear about as well. It works very similar. This is a medical equivalent to Inspire. This is a device that's designed, it's a tooth guard that's designed by a dentist. So you have to find your dentist to see how they do it. And it works by when you bring your teeth together, it kind of pulls your jaw a little forward. Designed to that your tongue is attached to your jaw, so it will tend to move everything forward and open it up. It really only works for mild sleep apnea, but it may be an equal solution to it. So it's something else that I talk to people about. You hit my question as to where I was going next. The next step in when we talk, we first determine the diagnosis. We try the CPAP because it's the first line, and then if that's not working, we go on to figuring out where the target is. Something called drug-induced sleep endoscopy. So this is a scope-based exam in which a small camera, a spaghetti noodle camera, is introduced through your nose and looks at the back of your throat. I do that on patients in the clinic all the time when they're awake to evaluate their nose or their throat for different things. The special part of this is that we do this while you're sleeping. Now, anybody who's had that done while they're awake knows that that's not the most comfortable thing in the world. It's not painful, but it's not comfortable. And trying to get someone to fall asleep and me sneak a camera into their noses doesn't work very well. Much less when they come into an operating room and they have me and nurses and anesthesia, everybody watching you fall asleep. You don't fall asleep. And so what we do is we give you just a whiff of anesthesia, not a full anesthetic where you're completely under a machine suit, just enough so that you stop caring about the bunch of people that are watching you sleep, and you stop caring that someone's sticking a camera in their nose. And then I look at what the areas that are blocking. So this is someone I did a couple months ago here, and as they're falling asleep, you can see everything starting to collapse, just slowly. And this one's important. This is the back of the tongue, and this is a cartilage called the epiglottis. It's designed to cover our airway when we swallow, so we don't breathe anything. You can see they just start kind of closing up as they're more relaxed and sleeping. And so this is what I do in order to figure out, this is a site of block for this person. This is the big culprit here. You can see that epiglottis at some point just completely shuts off their breathing. Okay. This was a person that didn't qualify for Inspire, because no matter what I do with the tongue, if this floppy thing here continues to block off their breathing while they're sleeping, well, it's not going to work. I say we're not going to get you anything. And so this is the next step along that pathway that we would do. This procedure is pretty fast, about 10-15 minutes. Okay, we give you just enough that you don't care and you're already tired because you have obstructive sleep apnea. You can fall asleep on any notice. And so we just give you enough for that, and then I just take a look and wake you back up. No recovery, really. You do have to have someone to drive you home because you were under some anesthesia, so legally you can't drive home. But it's a quick procedure, and there's no recovery. You may feel like I put something in your nose, and that's not right, okay? But this is the way that we find out exactly where along the pathway you're having blockage, and then can make a recommendation. Okay, so like I said, I don't have people come in and say, I want the Inspire. It's like, all right, let's go do it. It's more of, let's figure out what's going to help you, and I can give you a menu of what things are actually going to work for you and whether or not. One of the, as you were talking, palates become a big issue too as to what a main source of blockage. And there's new ways of doing palate surgeries in order to treat both snoring and to treat sleep apnea. Because if this is the area that's blocking off, we actually have some resources to move. I do something called a snoroplasty for people that just snore. It means we did the study, you're not blocking yourself, but you're driving your partner crazy, okay? That's a procedure that can be done both in the operating room and while someone's awake to stiffen this tissue of your palate so that it doesn't vibrate, it doesn't flop all over the place while you're sleeping, okay? It's only offered for people that if it's just a snore. The main big thing that I do is something called expansion pharyngoplasty. And that goes back into the plastic surgery side of these things. And that's a surgery in which we grab these large muscles that are here on the side of your throat and mouth and change their trajectory. So right now they're in this configuration, so everything flops down this way. Well, I make cuts in them and rearrange them so they're pulling up this way so that they're tented open permanently. Not something that you feel, but something that happens when you're sleeping so that when they relax, they can't relax this way. They only relax up this way. And that can cure sleep apnea as well. Okay? The benefit there is there's no implant, there's no, there's not something that you need to change a battery to. And so if this is a site of surgery, I don't consider that a loss for you. I consider that a win, that I have a different solution that will treat your sleep apnea and can get you the same result of trying to get rid of that CPAP machine. Tonsillectomy is one that people don't appreciate because tonsillectomy surgery is rather painful. And so people don't love it when I tell them that's a big issue. But if your tonsils sit right in this area, and so if you have big old tonsils, I took one out a couple weeks ago that were kind of touching this uvula. So you imagine adding all this extra tissue is blocking their breathing as soon as they fall asleep. Go ahead.
Pharyngoplasty lasts a lifetime?
A lifetime.
Really?
Yeah.
And this would all be determined by that.
By that sleep, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. We could tell if this is the area that's blocking off while you're sleeping, then I say, hey, this is what's going to be the thing that helps you. Okay. So tonsillectomy is something to also consider. And a lot of times what I find is that for certain people, doing both of these at the same time is feasible and kind of gets rid of everything altogether. Okay. In children, this is a staple. This is one of the main reasons why kids get tonsillectomies is for their sleep apnea when they're blocking, because kids have really strong muscles that don't relax very much. But if they have big tonsils there, that's the area that's blocking them when they're breathing. There's also other surgeries to your base of tongue. So the back of your tongue also has what's called a lingual tonsil, which most people don't actually realize. That tissue that's in the tonsil extends down to your tongue. So if you have large tonsils, or you did at one point, most people don't. It's not indicated to remove the lingual tonsils, but if those are still big, removing this much tissue can open up that throat enough to allow you to better sleep. The times I do this, if this is so much that I know that if I pull this tongue forward with something like the Inspire, you still have so much tissue there that's blocking, then it's better to start with this, and a lot of times that can be enough. There's also surgeries for this muscle down here, this bone right here, which is called the hyoid, which is what suspends that little thing that I showed you earlier, the epiglottis, that little cartilage. And so if that's what's causing it, we can suspend and kind of bring that into a more forward position so that this can't flop back quite as much. Okay, so now this is where we get into the weeds a little bit and where I kind of stop talking because people their eyes start glazing over. But this is a conversation that we have after the sleep endoscopy to figure out, hey, what's really going to help you? What's not going to help you? It's required before we move on to Inspire because of that reason. No insurance is going to authorize me putting an Inspire machine without having done that before, because they know that I can't tell you 100% for sure, and this is going to work if I haven't even looked into that. So again, a pathway to get there. I want to just summarize a little bit of what I talked about. Okay, one, better sleep, better quality of life. That's really my goal, is to get you a better quality of life. Either if that's just for you, but also for your partner, for your future, as we kind of prolong and kind of prevent long-term health effects from this. Remember that snoring doesn't necessarily equal sleep apnea, but they come hand in hand, and it's really important to note that difference. Control of sleep apnea is important for your health and for your quality of life. It's not just an inconvenience. It's not just my uncle making the kids laugh in the back of the SUV, but it's really something that's important to make sure that we keep everybody around. And proper treatment for sleep apnea is comprehensive. It has to be tailored to you. No two people are the same, and there's things along the pathway that we have to do in order to get you all the way to a better quality of life. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's really about finding out what things we can help improve your life in multiple ways.
Do you have to prove to insurance that you did try the CPAP as well?
You do have to prove to insurance that you tried the CPAP.
What if it was like 10 years ago?
That's fine. We don't have to prove it recently necessarily, but it's insurance has put that as one of the check marks that of things that when I'm submitting, did they fail CPAP? But everybody fails CPAP, okay? Because that's the first thing that we try for everybody, because that's the first line. Just pretty much everybody's tried it. If you're not on it now, it's because you didn't do it. But we do try with everybody, because if you came to me and we figured out you had sleep apnea, I wouldn't start with, let's do the sleep endoscopy and let's figure out what to do surgery-wise. I'm a surgeon. I enjoy surgery. That's what I like to do. However, that's not fair to you to jump off in that place. The benefit of CPAP is that if it doesn't work or you don't like it, you take it off. Okay? If I put an implant into your body and you don't like it or it doesn't work, you're not going to just take it off at home. Okay, now we're into a bigger deal. So I don't make people don't go down this pathway unless we've tried other alternatives. So everybody has to try the CPAP to see if that works. If it doesn't, you haven't had good sleep for a few weeks. You've got this machine and you're returning it, but you're not making any major life changes that will affect you in the future.
What's the difference between a CPAP and a BiPAP?
Oh, great question. Okay. A BiPAP works very similar to it. A CPAP is continuous positive pressure, just putting pressure in. BiPAP is bilateral pressure, meaning it puts pressure when you're breathing in and when you're breathing out. Okay, it's really designed for certain conditions, such a lot to do with our lungs. So if somebody has bad lungs and needs help getting inflated, it's putting pressure in while you're breathing in and out, so that it continues to go down. There is one other condition that I talk about, which is central sleep apnea. The difference there is that there's no blockage. It's your brain's forgetting to breathe. That's a complicated thing that would take another hour to explain. But on those conditions, you need a BiPAP because your brain's not breathing, so it's needing to put pressure in and out to keep you breathing.
During a sleep study, is that how they determine if you need to have a BiPAP?
They can, yeah. It can be big.
Because I didn't have a CPAP. I went directly to a BiPAP.
Depending exactly what they found during that study, they can calculate. I gave you the short version of here's your blockages, yes. But there's more lines to that and more things that they can determine if you need a little bit more help to keep your lungs full.
So the flip side of you're saying if CPAP doesn't work, then here's what we can do. But if CPAP does work, then you're done?
If you're happy. Okay. I have plenty of patients that are like that. We did the CPAP and they come back 6 weeks later. This is great. I can sleep great. I won't live with this. You're great. You don't need anything. That works. And what we consider the gold standard, meaning if it works, that's what we're trying to get back to. So all these surgeries are trying to get back to the same effect as if you had a CPAP. That's how we compare it.